Hey everyone, my name is Wassim, and today we're going to talk about some fun stuff and some boring stuff, and I've mixed it all together, so hopefully I can retain your attention. Once I get some lockdown on some pictures on the screen, we can get going. I should say something about myself. So I used to be a science kid, so I did a bunch of time at institutions, the kind of institutions with bars on the outside of the windows, universities. So I started off as a chemist, astrophysicist, laser spectroscopist, spent some time bridging between academia and industry, trying to license technologies, make spin-outs, fell down a rabbit hole of experimental electronic music. Then I started organizing parties, happenings in art galleries, touring robot sculptures, curating festivals. And that was kind of around Europe and the West Coast. And while I was touring one time around the West Coast, one of the friends of the musicians said, one of the musicians said, hey, I've got a friend in Santa Clara. He's an intern at Intel. Let's go hang out with him. So we went to his place, this like shoebox in Silicon Valley. He opened his closet and said, check this out, I'm doing this thing called mining Bitcoin. This was summer 2012. So I was like, what the hell is Bitcoin? And then that was my kind of accidental glitch in the matrix entry into this thing. Now, because I spent too long at university, I became like a professional skeptic. So that meant I thought this thing was dumb and stupid, and I just watched it as if it was a joke. And by then, my friend was really quite annoyed by his life choices because he was mining at a huge loss. California electricity is super expensive. So he was just like, he didn't have anything good to say about it. So it was a little bit of time watching before I started to see that this thing might have longer potential, longer time horizon. Basically, I watched the GOX thing ride all the way up and down, and then once people said the thing was dead, blocks kept coming, transactions kept happening, and I thought, well, this thing is like a cockroach. Now that is actually interesting. And so we find ourselves here today, really beyond my wildest expectations for Bitcoin 5 years ago, where, you know, Trump is tweeting about Bitcoin, and you know, I don't know if anybody saw when they hauled David Marcus from Calibra into the Congress Financial Services Committee recently. And they were talking about Bitcoin as if it was their old friend. And that was really interesting to me. So there's been a sea change. And I'm sure you're familiar with the saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think that might be like where we find ourselves now, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so let's play a game. Well, first we're going to do some boring stuff, and then we're going to play a game. And the game's called Sui Generis, Snowflake, or Shitcoin. So, firstly, what's the problem? Okay, taxonomy isn't going to fix this. Everything is still broken. We don't know what these things are. Regulators don't know what these things are. And so where these permissionless or trust-minimized networks meet the legacy institutions, the rule of law, and the kind of nation-state layer of human governance, we have problems. I think everyone in this room probably knows about those. So yes, this contains traces of jokes, some parodies. These are my own opinions, not the opinions of anybody else that I may or may not be associated with. They are subject to change. So if you do your proof of work on me, you may outrun my longest chain, and I may change my mind. So that is totally fine. This is not legal advice. I don't make endorsements. It's not financial advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a regulator. I don't know anything. I'm just some guy. Right? They gave me a microphone. I'm going to talk to you. So, I am working on a project called Crypto Economic Systems. This is a new journal and conference series based in a university on the East Coast. And this is aiming to address a pain point in, let's say, where academic research or scholarly research meets these protocols. So, as we all know, many of the most important innovations in this field were PDFs that got dropped on random servers by people whose identities we have no idea of. And so everything happens in this field in a kind of back-to-front way to the way that universities normally work. So what we're trying to do with this project is we're trying to find a way that we can get the kind of people that come from the old world of where these networks came from. So distributed systems engineers, protocol developers, cryptographers, and so on, And now, once we've built these networks, people start to use them. So there's kind of like economic activity and phenomena. Then you have like, squishy bags of meat and water, like humans interacting with these engineered networks. So then we have like political and social stuff. So we're trying to bring all of these people together to try and find a way that we can study these things in a disciplinary way. And this is actually really hard because the way that universities are structured is not compatible with this in a very easy way. So plenty of challenges, but we're trying. And we had a conference kicking off this effort in earnest last weekend, and by all accounts, it was well received. So by the time you go home, there should be 75 videos from the conference on the Digital Currency Initiative website. And yes, if any of you are researchers and you have some papers that you would like to undergo rigorous peer review in an interdisciplinary context, then we have a call for papers for the March conference, which will be 7th and 8th of March at MIT, and we would welcome your input. So, thank you. And without any further ado, let's get on with it. So what's the problem? The problem is human communication is hard. Like, we're humans, and we communicate with other humans in this actually quite messed up way if you think about it. So if I want to talk to Nindi, first of all, there's some neural impulses. We don't know where they came from. We just know that they exist. And then my body has to kind of down-convert them into small mouth noises. And we've collectively agreed that these small mouth noises have certain meanings and contexts in certain situations. So I will talk to Nindi with small mouth noises. Nindi will attempt to decode my small mouth noises, then his brain will try to understand the context within which they come. And so that is hard even at the best of times. And then, I'm speaking English, we're in Eastern Europe, there's people from all these different countries speaking different languages. I mean, like, I know there's more than one well-spoken language in this area of Transylvania, and they're different kinds of languages. So communication is hard. So especially in a field that's kind of full of jargon, and it's quite early on, so these things aren't really settled, what the meanings of these things are. So we have problems even at the most basic times. So there's this cool meme I found on Twitter. Does the pointer work? Which one is it? The top one. Yeah, this thing, yeah. A baklava wearing a balaclava while playing balalaika on black lava. So those words sound similar, but they mean different things. And by the same token, you can have words that sound different, but then they may have kind of overlapping meanings. And so this is a problem. So we're talking about cryptocurrency networks. So one of the ways that it's quite helpful to imagine these as kind of a conceptual lens you can use is a sort of a stack of layers. So this diagram was based on an original Medium post by Vitalik Buterin in 2017 called The Meaning of Decentralization. We've extended it a little bit. And so when people talk about things like permissionlessness, I would say that you could give a better definition than you could just with a verbal attempt by conceiving it on a particular layer. So I would say permissionlessness is primarily a social layer phenomenon where no subset of people are prevented from interacting with the network. You could say that censorship resistance is more primarily a protocol layer phenomenon, where no subset of transactions are prevented from entering the record. You could talk about decentralization at different layers of this meta stack. And if you kind of zoom out, reducto ad absurdum, then you end up with this thing, which is kind of like an ontological meta stack, where you start from natural philosophy and you go through physics and chemistry and biology and life sciences, with these things and the ideas and the concepts underlying them get more and more complicated. Now, what's really interesting about this is that as you kind of move up this stack, things get less clear. They get less objective. You're moving into a subjective realm. So as you move from classical physics up to biological organisms and then systems of organisms, it gets much harder to understand these things in discrete detail, and you're relying much more on, like, you're in a realm of subjectivity. But then at the bottom here, when you get down to like the nubbins of the universe, Planck time and so on, these things are also subjective. Quantum mechanics is then like another kind of semi-obscured subjective realm. So Tegmark sort of noticed this, and I've been calling it a subjectivity sandwich. And I don't think it's very tasty, but if you want to retain a sense of objectivity, you kind of have to sit in the middle of this realm, and you have to accept that if you deviate from central positions, you tend to get more subjective. Okay, so let's talk about cryptocurrencies and what have you. So these things, I mean, there's actually been quite a nice lead up to this talk so far. So people have been talking about, what makes a thing of money, and what makes a good commodity. I think Theo is going to be talking about memes a bit later. And so these things are different to pieces of gold or Apple stocks or USD, banknotes. Because of quite a few reasons, and I don't think I'm going to motivate them too much, but I'll just pass on. So yeah, I think we actually already had a primer on this from Dominic Frimsby about like kind of the Aristotelian idea of what makes a good money. Jevons also conceived this kind of store of value, medium exchange, unit of account thing that you've probably also heard. And you know this, Bitcoin is a network, and it's a protocol, and there's a kind of, a fruit, which is the token. So we can talk about the value of a network, or how valuable that the sum of all possibilities of that network can be. You've probably heard of Metcalfe's law, where the value of a network is supposed to be proportional to the square of the number of nodes. Now the problem with this x squared value distribution is it will just go to infinity, and that doesn't really make sense, because if you get more and more nodes, then this will just suck all of the value out of the universe. That sounds like a black hole. I know people say that Bitcoin's a black hole, but I don't know if that's what you really want, so yeah, take it from a physicist. So I actually much prefer this idea from Gogarty and Johnson, which is this network valuation capital approach, where you have these sort of various aspects of a particular protocol. So you can think of anything, any kind of monetary good, as a protocol, as a network, even if it's like fish or cans of sardine in a jail or USD or Bitcoin. If you just think of like the people that will accept that, merchants and the peers, think of those as the nodes, and then the price is determined kind of as a function of a few different things. So you have what you might call the redemption utility. So if this is a fish, you would be eating it. If it's a Bitcoin, you would be putting it in your hardware wallet, or spending it, or hodling it, or whatever you do with it. The network utility is like how acceptable this thing is, like how many people will take your money, If it's a fish, it might have to be somebody that really wants to eat that fish right now, so your network may be a little bit limited. And I think I probably don't need to motivate the speculative utility of a monetary asset. I think people are probably quite familiar with that by now. So what's really nice about this as well is you can think of this through a temporal lens. So in the past, everyone knows the price of Bitcoin yesterday. That is no big deal. We know that. That's on record. In the present moment, it's kind of an intersubjective fact made up of all these different parameters. Yeah. So the price now will be different than the price in 5 minutes, and it also depends on what somebody's willing to give you at that moment. And in the future, it's anyone's guess. So the joke I usually make here is, if anybody knows the price of Bitcoin next week, please come and see me afterwards. I would like to learn your secrets. So anyway, we will move on. But I would first say that we are talking about a tension between objectivity and subjectivity, and that's a theme I'm going to revisit. So here's where we are today. It's not good. We still don't know what these things are. We still have like governments and regulators arguing over what this thing is and what it isn't. And this is not very helpful for the parts of the ecosystem industry that interface like between the native protocols and between the social layers and the nation state layers and so on. So, you probably log on to Twitter. This is the kind of conversation you get, right? My coin is money, your coin is not. Your coin is a security, my coin is not. And this conversation hasn't moved on. It's been several years that this conversation has been at this like very basic level. And I got a bit fed up with that, so I'm going to show you what I did. Okay, so, whoops, just skipped 10 slides. Okay, yeah. So these are some selections from stories from the news, and there's even been more, like the CFTC had some comments about Ethereum this week, so the news is kind of coming. But nothing is set in stone. So what's interesting is that you have like legislative rulings about whether Bitcoin counts as money in certain circumstances or not. Some people talking about whether they think that Ethereum has properties of a security or not. In June of 2018, William Hinman, senior SEC official, made some comments that by his reckoning, that Ethereum had, in the time of its token sale, was very likely a security offering, but by the time of speaking, it had become sufficiently decentralized that it was no longer the case. Now, that's all well and good, but we have to try and understand what those words actually mean. If something started off as A and it went to B, then that thing changed at some point. So when did it change? How did it change? Why did it change? And we're no clearer on that. So this is kind of where I'm going with all this. So here's a graph of number go up. We all like number go up, don't we? Yeah? This is the graph of SEC enforcements, and it is going to the moon. So be careful what you wish for. You wanted number go up. Here it is. Okay, so we're going to build some techniques to try and better understand the similarities and differences of these things, and we're going to use a technique called taxonomies. So maybe when you were in school, you learned about the binomial nomenclature of how species are named. You know, we're Homo sapiens, and T is Camellia sinensis, and so on. So that's kind of like a hierarchical classification model to try and separate out and label the similarities and differences of different things. Like, you know, how many legs does a creature have? Does it suckle its young? Does it have body hair? And you can then discretize whether things are, how to group things according to similarities and differences. So we can use a similar technique to that. So that's how it started. Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s in Sweden. And this guy was very prolific. So he wrote, reams and reams and reams. He's like the Giacomo Zucco of the 18th century, right? So he wrote reams and reams and reams trying to classify everything, trying to find the edge cases and trying to refine this thing. So you can't really start off with a blank slate and end up with a finished product. You kind of have to iterate this thing because there's always new plants or new cryptocurrencies, and they may or may not fit in your classification system. So this is kind of a dynamic process. And then people started developing this is classifications of products extracted from coal and tar. So people are starting to use this kind of natural binomial nomenclature to do these kinds of things. Okay, so I'm a chemist, and this is like my favorite thing ever, because it represents triumph of the systemization of knowledge. So in the time of Isaac Newton, side note, this is my old professor, Martin Polyakov, and he is the world's largest connoisseur of periodic tables in the world. That is the smallest periodic table in the world on one of the strands of his distinctive hair. And this is his collection of periodic table ties, and that's him almost getting decapitated by some guy. Okay, so anyway, didn't always look like that. It started off in the days of occultism, of alchemy, of saltpeter and niter, mixing air and fire, phlogiston, and all these other things. And so what happened was, over the years, there were theories, axiomatic theories, there were empirical experiments, and then these things kind of fed back into loops of understanding to improve our conception of how these things are. So this is what I'm saying, right? We're making theories, we're doing experiments, or we're observing, and then we're kind of learning in a feedback loop from that. This is kind of the iterative process here. So let's get back to cryptocurrencies. These are some early attempts to try and tease out similarities and differences of tokens, crypto-economic derivatives, coins, whatever you want to call them. And so these are all well and good. Oh, that's my alarm to start my talk. Thanks for starting me early. Okay, so, and these things are useful and they look nice, but I don't know if they really explain very much about what these things actually are, the kind of ontological and epistemological bases of reality. And this is a picture of Plato's cave. I don't know if anybody's come across this. If you've read a philosophy book, you might have. The idea that you're kind of looking at somebody sitting in a cave, and all they can see is the shadow of some people outside the cave. So they're seeing kind of a reflection or an abstracted representation. So you're not seeing the real thing, you're kind of seeing the shadow of the thing. Yeah, so actually I quote Simulacra, which is Jean Baudrillard in the paper. There's a very long paper if you are super bored and you can't sleep, read the paper. these things don't explain to you what these things are. You're not getting explanatory power. So this is not like the periodic table. This is more like mixing saltpeter and fire and stuff. Yeah. Okay. This is like some bankers that did this a couple of years ago. And, oh, what's that? It's a caveman with some really advanced technology that he doesn't understand. This is a professor from a business school in London, and this is his periodic table of cryptocurrencies. And this is probably the least good one that I have found so far. This doesn't explain anything. He did not spell the words on his axes correctly. And yeah, okay, enough said about that. So yes, some memes about taxonomies. So yeah, this is not good enough. Let me show you one that is actually quite good. This is from the information systems literature. So this is not cryptocurrency people. These people don't know anything about cryptocurrencies. These people are applying methodologies. It could be sacks of wheat, or it could be tokens. Like, they don't know. They're just like throwing these things into a big mill and sorting them through. So what they did was a taxonomy of ICOs to try and compare and contrast, like, was there a supply cap? Was there pre-vesting? Was there blah, blah, blah? Yeah. So they found, actually, quite interestingly, a few different clusters of kind of populations or types of projects. So yeah, that was a good one. There's some more good ones coming out, and this is my point where I say, like, just describing these things isn't good enough. We need actually explanatory power. If you're just describing it, think about like when you do your laundry and you sort all your different bits out, and you've got your socks and you've got your jackets and you've got your t-shirts. But you didn't learn anything about what these things are. You didn't learn what the meaning of the sock is, right? You have not learned anything. You've just sorted some stuff out. So that's all well and good, but I think we can do better. So let's circle back to this notion where people are discussing whether things are monies or not, whether things are securities or not. I think most people probably agree that these things are quite commodity-like. You know, these things are basically almost like perfect digital commodities, I guess. So with that in mind, come on. Yeah, okay, great. I will present to you token space. So token space is this kind of idealized three-dimensional construction. It's a kind of abstract space. And in this space, you have, well, I've drawn one with 3 dimensions, but you can actually draw one with any number of dimensions. And each of these dimensions, each of these axes, is a sliding scale from 0 to 1. And each of the labels on the axis are securityness, so how much of a security a token or an asset or whatever is likely to be, moneyness, which I think is a bit more explanatory, and commodityness. And so, why 3 dimensions? Well, if it was 2 dimensions, then we're 3-dimensional creatures. So if we live in a 2-dimensional world, then we might be flatlanders or flat earthers. So let's keep it 3D. Now we'll acknowledge that things like commodityness and moneyness are not strictly orthogonal. I just draw them orthogonally so that we can look at these things in 3D space. You can draw taxonomy token spaces with any number of dimensions. The tools are all there in the manuscript, generalizable framework. You can apply it yourself. If you don't like mine, build your own. So yes. That is an example of the parameters or the characteristics that would go into the scoring of a taxonomy. So you're trying to think about what the important things are. So this is about how security-like something is. Oh no, it's actually all of them. Yeah, so governance type, and how is it issued, and was it an ICO, was it a fork, was it an airdrop, how well aligned are the stakeholders, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and that is a specific instantiation of the taxonomy. And what you can see here, there's some scores over each thing. So each of these characteristics gets scored, then they get weighted, then this all gets squashed down into one number, and that's the number you plot on your chart, which is a bit like price, right? Price is a big dimensional reduction of objective and subjective factors. So think about it in that frame. Okay, so yeah, we squash all of these things into one number. Whoops. Yes, and this is something quite important. So you're playing between objectivity and subjectivity. Now, the reason that you're playing between objectivity and subjectivity is there's a very important reason. Now, I think, I come from the cult of science, so I've been like indoctrinated to think that objectivity is supreme and subjectivity is bad, and we must always be objective, and subjectivity is weakness. But the reality is that if you stick in the objective realm here, then you're going to be susceptible to metrics being gamed and manipulated. There's a thing which economists like to call Goodhart's law, which is that which can be measured, can be manipulated, becomes an optimization target and will be manipulated. So imagine we said, 10,000 nodes means you're sufficiently decentralized, means you're not a security. So like I will run to the phone and call AWS. 10,000 nodes, please, Jeff Bezos. Oh, cool, I don't go to jail now, yay. So, okay, those metrics are too easily gamed to be meaningful. And so if you stick in the objective realm, then you are susceptible to this good heart manipulability. But on the flip side, if you are straying very far into the subjective realm, then you need to own that. You need to own that this is mixed with your opinions, your judgment, your bias. And that's why what I'm going to present to you now is very likely, at least partially, a projection of my biases. And if you don't agree, run your own numbers. Like this is kind of like a conceptual tool, like a visual grammar, which you can use as a medium to communicate. Okay, so is the problem computers or is the problem humans using computers? Like, we like to think that everything we do is objective, but ultimately, if there's humans at the wheel, then, we have opinions and biases and we don't know them and we're squishy bags of meat and water. So this is a token space. And on the axes, you have these different things, securityness, commodityness, and moneyness. And this is, imagine like a regulatory surface. So imagine like or even like a traffic light system, red, yellow, and green. And this could be like, above here, things are not cool. Yeah, you might get a knock on the door or a subpoena. Then maybe under here or around here, things are marginal. And then maybe below there, things are cool. Now, again, because it's subjective, if I was a regulator and I was applying this, it would apply, in a jurisdictionally specific way. So again, it's subjective, remember that. And if you have these data points, then you can start to do statistical computing, cluster analysis, and so on. So this is just like illustration. Tables, blah, blah, blah. Pictures. Okay, so this is a token space with the top 10 assets using the admittedly terrible metric of market cap as of 6 months ago. So one thing you can see is that Bitcoin is kind of out here. So it looks like a pretty good commodity. It's something of a decent money, and it's not very security-like. And then next up is, that's where Ethereum came out. So it's somewhere in the middle of all these things. It's a reasonable commodity. It's a middling money. And it's more security-like than Bitcoin, because they did a token sale, there's a foundation, and so on. So then you have Bitcoin-like proof-of-work networks. Now they are issued in a fair way, so their securityness is lower. But then there are these kind of more concentrations of influence and power, foundations and what have you, prominent individuals. Then Tether's up here. I think Tether is not well modeled by this system, so I actually think that stable coins don't quite fit into this thing, so there's some work there for somebody to extend this thing and look at ways that we can compare and contrast the stable coins. Then you have the federated networks, XRP and XLM. Ooh, they're a bit high on that securityness thing, aren't they? Well, that might be because the insiders control quite a lot of the supply, possibly, and run most of the nodes. And then you have kind of a class of 2017 ICOs, which I am not going to talk about too much. So, okay, let's play the game. So this is Bitcoin evolving over time. Yeah, so I haven't built taxonomies for each of these things. This is like a little bit of an indicative exercise. So, when Bitcoin started off, it was just Satoshi and Hal, wasn't it? So it wasn't like super decentralized. So you could argue that it had some element of securityness that it has less of today. It's become a better money because more people accept it today than they did before. So what do you guys think? Is it Sui Generis? Is it a Snowflake? Or is it a shitcoin? Sui Generis, put your hands up. Oh, do you know what Sui Generis means? It means unique, unique in its own right. So does anybody think it's Sui Generis? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, that's a few. Snowflake? Quiet at the back. Shitcoin. Anyone think it's a shitcoin? Anyone? Okay, so that's pretty unanimous. Hey. Okay. Ethereum. Look at that, Ethereum, little baby Ethereum up there, looking pretty security-like, coming down over time. If you're charitable, some people are less charitable than others, but I tried not to let my biases inform this too much. So, okay, Sui Generis, Snowflake, shitcoin. Actually, that's quite even. I think it's a Snowflake. Maybe it will mature into something else. Huh? Exactly, yes. This is like a Snowflake 1.0, yeah. XRP. So is this Sui Generis? Is it something unique? Is it a snowflake? Uh-oh. So, oh, what's this? Unregistered securities. Whoa. So this is a real thing I found on Twitter. It's not from Ripple. It's from, you can guess who it's from. This is what they're peddling now as the use case for the Tangle coin thing. Okay, so, yep. Gold. Sui Generis? Sui Generis? Anyone? Yeah? Snowflake? Shitcoin? I think it's a snowflake. And the reason for that is, it comes back to the points that Max was making earlier about the unforgeable costliness the unforgeable costliness of production and the ease of obtaining. So the thing with gold is it's rare. Yeah, it's rare on Earth, and it's expensive to dig out of the ground. But if the price goes up, then the number of gold goes up, people go dig in the ground. But where's all the gold on planet Earth? Where is it? It's in the ocean. There's more gold in the ocean than there is on land, right? But it's just not economically viable to recover it. But there are metal organic frameworks, like mini meshes, mini sieves, being developed for uranium extraction from seawater now. So it's only a matter of time before that becomes economically viable to recover. Supply of gold goes up. And what about the space mining? Luxembourg has a ministry of space mining. What do you think they want to do? They want to go and get asteroids and bring the gold back to Earth. Actually, my favorite conspiracy theory is that all the gold goes to the advanced alien civilization that Roswell, we did a deal and we get the gold and we give it to them. So if that's the case, then maybe it is really scarce. Then I would revise this. Yeah, okay. So USD. Is it Sui Generis? Is it a snowflake? Is it a shitcoin? Uh-oh. It's a tough one, right? Because the USD is the kind of de facto global currency, but the purchasing power value of USD is only going in one direction, and the current financial system is basically buckling at the seams because of the dominance of this one currency. So, yeah, I think that is pretty much it. So, yeah, thanks for your attention. If you want to read a paper, it's linked there, and if you want to know more about the journal I'm working on, it's there. All right, thank you.